Chapter 8. The Innocent Man. The arrest of Aldrich Ames in 1994 had appeared to explain most, although not all, of the betrayals of the Russians working for the CIA and the FBI almost a decade earlier. But the KGB's warning to Felix Bloch in 1989 of the FBI's investigation of him created a critical counterintelligence dilemma. It meant that someone inside U.S. intelligence had tipped off the KGB to the Bloch investigation. It could not have been Aldrich Ames, because the counterintelligence professionals were able to confirm that Ames had no access to the Bloch case. It followed, therefore, that someone other than Ames had alerted the KGB and Bloch. The conclusion was very bad news and inescapable. There was a second mole. Brian Kelly was well known and much admired in the counterintelligence world. He had built his career as a specialist on illegals, the Russian spies sent west without benefit of diplomatic cover. Kelly had headed the illegals group at the CIA. His was an arcane, difficult specialty, because illegals are rarely detected. They do not pose as diplomats and often steal the identities of long-dead or living persons. They can be anybody. It was Kelly who was credited with unmasking Rhino Gichman as a KGB illegal. Although Gichman had apparently been seen entering the back door of the Soviet embassy in Vienna, that in itself did not prove he was an illegal. Moreover, as far as the Austrian intelligence service could tell, Gichman had never met with Felix Bloch in Vienna. When he arranged to dine with Bloch in Paris in mid-May of 1989 and left with the airline bag that Bloch had placed under the table, he had used the name Pierre Bart. Since Gichman claimed to be a Finn, in attempting to penetrate his legend, as the false background created for illegals are known, Kelly would have contacted Finnish intelligence. And investigators in Finland discovered that the man who called himself Rhino Gichman had written to the Finnish Orthodox Church in Hämeenlinna, Finland, from Bremen, West Germany, in the spring of 1966. Gichman enclosed a copy of a purported birth certificate showing he was born March 27, 1930, in Eno, Karelia, in a portion of Finland that became Soviet territory. But none of the people in Eno knew the name Gichman, where he claimed he was born. Records from that village had been moved to Kuopio, in central Finland, but in 1952 4 registry books had been stolen from Kuopio, almost certainly by the KGB. As a result, it was impossible to verify the information on Gichman's birth certificate. But since the copy looked real, the church issued him an original. Once he had that, Gichman was able to obtain a valid Finnish passport. Later, in 1966, he moved to Finland. He lived in 3 towns in Finland, doubtless to build his cover. In the summer of 1967, he moved to Helsinki. In 1968, he married a woman named Marta Nieminen in Turku, a river town in southwest Finland. The next year they moved to Dusseldorf, where a son was born in 1969. Then they moved back to Finland, to Espoo, an affluent suburb of Helsinki. Gichman's elaborate legend illustrated the lengths to which the KGB went to create an invented identity for an illegal, and the complexity of Kelly's task. Inside the CIA, Brian Kelly was widely known and respected as the officer who had unmasked Gichman and made the Bloch case. He received a medal from the agency for his work in uncovering the trail that led to Bloch. Yet, in the wilderness of mirrors that is counterintelligence, it was precisely because Kelly had broken the Bloch case through his patient investigative work that he fell under suspicion by the FBI. Because of that success, in a story that could have been written by Franz Kafka, his career came crashing down, and his life tragically upended. But Brian Kelly was innocent. He was not a mole. he was a loyal and dedicated CIA officer. Kelly had joined the CIA after 20 years in the Air Force. At the agency, Kelly was a career officer in the Directorate of Operations, a euphemism for the agency's clandestine side, the spies and counter-spies. He had carved out his illegals specialty almost from the start. He worked counterintelligence cases in New York City in the early 1980s and later was posted to Panama, returning from there at the end of 1997. Long divorced, he had a daughter who also worked at the CIA, and 2 sons. His ordeal began with a mistake by a CIA asset, Alexander Zaporozhsky, codename Max, the KGB colonel who had volunteered to spy for the U.S. Several years earlier, he provided the vital tip that helped the CIA identify Aldrich Ames. But now he claimed, erroneously, that the new mole that Mike Rochford and the FBI were seeking had worked on the Block case. As it turned out, the real mole had never worked on the case, but had learned of the FBI investigation of Block and betrayed it to the KGB. The KGB in turn alerted Block in the phone call from Gickman, who used the name Ferdinand Paul and warned about a contagious disease. Mole hunters typically construct a matrix, matching the secrets believed to have been compromised with the names of the people who had access to those secrets. Then they try to winnow down the list, eliminating the names, for example, of those whose access occurred only after the suspected date that the information leaked. In this case, a matrix including Brian Kelly's name would only have reinforced the FBI's mistake. There was also an institutional problem. The Bureau was reluctant to think that whoever tipped off the KGB to the Block investigation could be someone in its own ranks. It preferred to think the mole was in the CIA. When Kelly returned from Panama, he was blissfully unaware that a few miles away across the Potomac, his life was under microscopic examination by the FBI. Kelly was assigned to review the Block case files, to go over them again to make sure that nothing had been missed. But the task was a subterfuge, designed to keep him busy and cut off from other CIA operations and secrets. At the FBI, Mike Rochford was in charge of the squad assigned to find the mole. When suspicion focused on Kelly, the FBI gave him the code name Gray Deceiver. The more Rochford studied Kelly's career, the more convinced he became, erroneously, that he had found the mole, and that it was Brian Kelly. It was not just Rochford. His view was shared by the FBI's senior counterintelligence officials. The FBI applied to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court and obtained permission to place the CIA man under intense scrutiny. His home in Vienna, Virginia, was bugged and secretly searched, as was his garbage, his telephones tapped, and his every move carefully watched. The FBI was alarmed but also reassured, erroneously, that it was in fact on the trail of the Russian mole inside the CIA when it learned that Brian Kelly was planning to travel to the Canadian border at Niagara Falls. It was alarmed because the Bureau's counter-spies knew that KGB intelligence officers, IOs in the FBI's vocabulary, were known to slip over the border from Canada into the U.S. to meet a source. The FBI hoped that it might catch a Russian spy in the act of meeting secretly with Kelly. Canada was also a favorite staging ground used by the Russians to insert illegals, spies without the protection of diplomatic status, into the United States. In the most notable case, Rudolf Abel, a KGB illegal, slipped over the border from Canada in 1948 and set up in Brooklyn, in New York City, as a photographer and artist. He was later betrayed by his KGB assistant, caught, convicted, and sent to a federal prison. In 1962, in the early morning chill on the Glienicke Bridge in Berlin, he was famously traded for Francis Gary Powers, the CIA U-2 pilot shot down over Sverdlovsk. He was captured, convicted in a show trial in Moscow, and imprisoned. The trade was described at the time in The U-2 Affair, my book co-authored with Thomas B. Ross, and in 2017 in Steven Spielberg's film Bridge of Spies. Although Kelly did not know it, he was under intense FBI surveillance on his trip to Niagara Falls. In counterintelligence work, once a person falls under suspicion, the investigators may seize upon innocent events and circumstances that suddenly take on ominous meaning. When Kelly traveled to Niagara Falls, the FBI watchers were with him. Because Kelly, a loyal American, was wrongly suspected as a Russian spy, the FBI thought he might be getting ready to meet a KGB contact. The Bureau was ready to pounce. Kelly, in fact, was there on a counterintelligence investigation for the CIA. But the Bureau persuaded itself that he was taking evasive action, known in the spy trade as dry cleaning, to lose a tail. "We had surveillance on him and we lost him at the border," a former FBI counterintelligence official said. "We thought he was cleaning himself." The FBI counterspies reasoned that Kelly was taking evasive action by using an SDR, Bureau jargon for a surveillance detection route. The FBI thought they had spotted a known Russian intelligence officer in the vicinity, but they saw no meeting with Kelly. However, that was far from the whole story. The FBI's surveillance of Kelly at the Canadian border took an unexpected and awkward turn. "He went into Canada," the former counterspy said. That created a dilemma for the FBI. Under the rules, the FBI was not allowed to operate on Canadian soil, at least not without official permission. The CSIS, the Canadian Secret Intelligence Service, would be unhappy if we followed him, he said. So the FBI surveillance operation had the potential for a diplomatic rift between Washington and Ottawa. All the FBI source would say was, "We did lose him at the border." In Panama, Kelly had been seen brushing past what one FBI agent called an individual suspected of a connection to Russian intelligence. It was a very quick pass. There could have been a verbal exchange as well. But for all the Bureau knew, the man may have been a source recruited by Kelly for the CIA. He was never asked about the contact. The physical surveillance was carried out by the Gs, the Bureau's special surveillance group. "The Gs were on him for a long time," a former FBI agent said. When the FBI secretly searched Kelly's home, agents found a map of nearby Nottoway Park with what it regarded as suspicious markings. Soviet intelligence officers had been seen in the vicinity of the park, and the discovery of the map added to Rochford's and the Bureau's conviction that the investigation was on the right track. Try as it would, Rochford's squad, even with the benefit of the watchers and electronic eavesdropping, was not able to make a case against Kelly. It could not do so for the simple reason that he was totally innocent. So the FBI decided to run a sting against him. Perhaps if Kelly could be duped into thinking the FBI was onto his supposed espionage, he would try to run. In November 1998, a stranger appeared at the door of his home. In a thick foreign accent, the man said the authorities now knew about his spying. The stranger handed him a piece of paper with an escape plan and told him to be at a nearby subway station the next evening. Then the man disappeared into the night. The FBI sting failed for two reasons. Kelly was not a spy, and he reported the bizarre incident to the FBI the next morning. He gave a description of the foreigner so that a Bureau artist could sketch the man. But the FBI simply assumed that Kelly was too clever to fall for the sting. He was so cool and confident, Rochford believed, that inside the Washington field office, Kelly became known as the Iceman. Espionage is a very difficult crime to prove. When the FBI's various stratagems, including the stranger at the door with an escape plan, failed to work, it decided to confront Kelly. Sometimes when that happens, a suspect will confess. often in the desperate hope that he will be turned and played back by the Bureau against the Russians as a double agent, instead of being sent to prison. On August 18, 1999, Kelly was summoned to a meeting in a small conference room at CIA headquarters. Awaiting him there were two special agents of the FBI, Rudy Guerin and Doug Gregory. Guerin was one of the agents who, 5 years earlier, had arrested Aldrich Ames. Gregory, though not on Rochford's mole-hunting squad, was called in because he had earned a reputation as the best investigator in the FBI's New York division. In his late 50s, of medium height with gray hair and glasses, he was known to be methodical and thorough. Any hard case, they turned over to Doug Gregory, an FBI colleague said. The two FBI men were blunt. They accused Kelly of being a Russian spy. They knew all about his activities, they told him, and even claimed to know his SVR code name. For Kelly, it was a very scary moment. By now, Congress had changed the law, and espionage carried the death penalty. The FBI agents triumphantly pulled out a copy of the marked map of Nottoway Park that they had taken from his home. The FBI had stamped it secret. The spy map, the agents informed him, was proof that he was the long-sought Russian mole. The X marks and the times written on the map indicated when and where he had placed secret documents in dead drops. "How do you explain this?" one of the agents shouted. "Where did you get my jogging map?" Kelly countered. The questioning went on for several hours, the agents urging Kelly to confess his capital crime. Kelly insisted he had nothing to confess. The agents ratcheted up the pressure. Unless he admitted his espionage, they said, they would have to question members of his family, including, over Kelly's strong objections, his frail 84-year-old mother, who was in a nursing home. Kelly stood firm. At the end of the interrogation, Kelly was escorted out of CIA headquarters by a counterintelligence officer, who took his badge. He was placed on administrative leave that was to last 21 months. In limbo, falsely accused as a spy, and facing a possible death penalty, Kelly, having served his country for 37 years, had nowhere to turn. He could only wait and hope that he would eventually be cleared of the crime he knew he had not committed. On that same afternoon in August, while Kelly was being confronted by Gregory and Guerin, his 28-year-old daughter, a CIA employee in the agency's personnel department, was escorted to a small windowless room with a table and 4 metal chairs. 2 FBI agents, a man and a woman, were there. "Please sit down," one of the agents told her. "We have some bad news for you." Frightened, Kelly's daughter could not imagine what had happened. "Your father is a spy," the FBI agent said. "He's working for the Russians." The room seemed to spin. Kelly's daughter loved her father and had followed in his footsteps by joining the CIA. When the FBI man accused her father of espionage, it was as though her world had suddenly disintegrated. She began to shake and weep uncontrollably. She stood up and turned away from the agents, facing the wall, still sobbing. After a few moments, she regained her composure and sat down. The interview continued. The male agent did the questioning, while a younger female agent took notes. The FBI man pulled out a copy of the jogging map and informed her it showed the location of dead drops. She denied her father could possibly be a spy, but that appeared to infuriate the agent. He pounded the table. "Come on," he yelled. "We know what he did." Agents fanned out to find the other family members, and the same scene was repeated. Over the next 48 hours, Kelly's ex-wife, his 2 sons, and 2 sisters were all interrogated by the FBI. In Connecticut, the agents warned Kelly's sister that if she did not cooperate, they would question her ailing mother in the nursing home. In Kentucky, the FBI caught up with Kelly's younger son at his office, flashed the map, which they said had come from his father's den, and explained that it proved he was a Russian spy. After an hour, the distraught son lurched past his staring co-workers and out into the rain to be alone. He wondered, could it possibly be true? In Manhattan, the FBI located Kelly's oldest son, who was on a business trip and about to leave for a flight back to Washington. The agents escorted him to LaGuardia Airport, questioning him as the car crawled through the rush-hour traffic. As soon as he got home that evening, he called his father and drove to his house in Vienna. His father was waiting in the driveway. "I just want to make sure you believe me," he said. "You never have to worry about that," his son replied as they hugged. In the end, after pleas by family members, the FBI did not interview Kelly's mother in the nursing home. But several of his friends and colleagues were interviewed and sworn to silence. As summer turned to fall, Kelly was having repeated problems with the telephones at his home. In October, a technician dispatched by the telephone company to investigate the trouble found a bug on the line. All during 2000 and into 2001, Brian Kelly remained on leave, barred from Langley headquarters. The experience, his attorney John Moustakis said, was emotionally devastating to him and his family. Kelly told friends he never would have gotten through it all but for a parish priest in whom he confided, who helped him cope. Kelly and his children lived with uncertainty for 18 months. Finally, having found no evidence to support its suspicion about Kelly, the FBI asked whether he would be willing to take a polygraph test to confirm that he was not a Russian spy. He agreed. When the test was over, the operator told him he had shown no evidence of deception. He was finally reinstated by the CIA in May 2001. However, he no longer worked on Russian illegals and was reassigned to a different job. He never requested a monetary settlement from the CIA for the trauma he endured for so long, falsely accused as a Russian spy and precipitously expelled from the headquarters building. He did not ask for or get a settlement, Patricia "Trish" Kelly, his wife, said. He just wanted to go back to clear his name. He did that. But the months of groundless suspicion had damaged his CIA career beyond repair.